You know, I don't think Camille's gonna kill Char, and I definitely don't think Char wants to kill Camille. Now, I recognize that the whole one brother will kill the other thing was kind of the focus of the quest, and by the end of it, Camille had found the resolve to kill Char after decades of wavering. But when you really stop and think about what's actually in this quest, it becomes very clear that a scenario wherein either brother kills the other just isn't in the cards. I mean, it's pretty obvious that Char's current actions are misleading on purpose, and Camille is too much of a big-hearted sweetie pie that's too distracted by his emotions to notice. So I would like to take this opportunity to explain why Char and Camille's story isn't one that ends in fratricide, and is instead a story about breaking a historical cycle of violence. So I'm gonna explain what exactly this historical cycle of violence is, how it applies to the vampire twins, and why I think they're going to break it. But to do that, I'm gonna need to explain a little bit about their family history. And before we start, I'd like to remind you that this video is just a theory based on my own opinions and the contents of Camille's story quest, Dance Macabre. So if for whatever reason you haven't played the quest yet, you should go play it right now while Camille's banner is still live so that you don't regret not picking up this sweet little cutie pie. Link in the description if you need it. And with that out of the way, let's move on to that family history I was talking about. Camille and Char Arno are vampires from the Ses'qa settlement of Ses'qa. Their parents appear to be military engineers that traveled from Terra to Talos II around 150 years ago. And this relationship to Ses'qa is actually rather important because Ses'qa is a bit unique when compared to the other Talosian settlements. See, Ses'qa is actually a nomadic flying ship that's built around a modified Fahrenheit fang that the Sarkaz received from the Sami people on Talos II. And according to Camille, his parents were actually the first members of Ses'qa. So he comes from one of Ses'qa's founding families. However, I think they weren't just the founding members of Ses'qa. I also believe that they were responsible for Ses'qa's development and construction, at least in part. See, Camille says his parents built a Sarkaz military vessel called the Lifebone from the remains of a Ferment a Sarkazian vampire killed way back on Terra. More on that story a little bit later. This is why I call his parents engineers. Now, if you read the lore that's found in Camille's signature weapon, you're gonna notice that the Sarkaz there discuss turning the Sami's gifted Ferment fang into another Lifebone, because the Sarkaz people need the Lifebone. And the one who pitches the idea of turning the fang into a mobile city in the first place is a female vampire wielding a spiked spear. Likely the exact same spear that Camille wields as his signature. And that heavily implies that this vampiress is Camille and Char's mother, one of the original builders of the Lifebone. That's why I think it makes sense to say that his family likely built Ses'qa as well. Ses'qa's construction is based on the construction of the Lifebone. Given all these very direct and explicit references to the Lifebone, I also think it's very possible that the Ferment fang used to build Ses'qa actually came from Lifebone. Although it is equally possible that it's actually from the Ferment Sami instead, since it was a gift from the Sami people, but I don't necessarily think it matters which Ferment the fang came from, because both Sami and Lifebone are connected to the concept of prophecies, which are going to become way more relevant later on, but I do think the philosophy behind Ses'qa's prophecies matches the philosophy of prophecies that we see when it comes to Lifebone. You'll understand why I'm making this point a little bit later, but either way, I think coming from a founding family of Ses'qa makes it really easy to understand Camille's loyalties. But that basically covers what we know about the Arno family history, so let's shift gears a little bit and talk about the timeline of events that led up to the main conflict between Camille and Char. Now, in case you've forgotten the meager timeline of the game so far, about a decade after the Terrans arrived on Talos II, the gateway connecting both planets was rendered inoperable, and the stranded Talosians were faced with the invasion of the Angeloi alone. This event came to be known as the Angeloi War, the greatest and most famous hero of which was named Jakub Messin. He was a Sarkaz soldier from Ses'qa, which is really important to know because a few decades after the war ended, Jakub abandoned the newly formed civilization band alliance that he helped bring about by ending the Angeloi War, and then he founded the original Landbreakers and used them to launch a rebellion against all of the allied settlements. It was during one of these attacks on Ses'qa that Camille rushed home to find his parents dead and his younger brother Char barely breathing. Desperate not to lose his only surviving family member, Camille gave Char half of his blood, which allowed Char to recover while also allowing him to obtain half of Camille's blood powers. And this is where Camille's woes truly began. See, Char had always known about a prophecy which claimed that one day, either he or Camille would commit fratricide, causing a sea of blood and carnage that would only end at the hour when light and dark finally mixed. Camille, on the other hand, had no knowledge of this prophecy, and while it's never stated in-game, I think his family may have kept him in the dark because he had exceptionally powerful blood arts, but Char didn't. That meant it was very likely that Camille would be the one to kill Char, not the other way around. So not telling Camille about the prophecy was probably a preventative measure. And Char hated this prophecy and still does. He's made it his life's mission to thwart the prophecy and destroy its source, which is Ses'qa itself. So once he got his hands on half of Camille's blood powers, he realized he finally had the means or the ability to actually make that happen. He could use these powers to destroy Ses'qa, and by association, the prophecy. So he attacked Camille and used the conflict as an excuse to join the Landbreakers, slowly working himself up through the ranks until he became the lieutenant of his parents' killer, Yaqub Messin. Now, I'm not entirely sure why Char would choose to side with Yaqub. On the one hand, you can argue that Char maybe hated his parents because they favored Camille over him, so maybe the murder doesn't bother him. But on the other hand, you could argue that maybe the ends justify the means for Char. He wants to destroy the prophecy at all costs, even if it means siding with his parents' killers. Or maybe it's a secret third option where Char actually also wants to take down the Landbreakers, but he's gonna do it from the inside. I don't know, and I'm not gonna speculate. All that really matters is that Char joined the Landbreakers. And in the same way that Ses'qa took responsibility for Yaqub's actions since he was a Sarkaz and therefore a citizen of Ses'qa, Camille decided to take responsibility for his hand in Char's defection. And so he became a Keeper of Wisdom in order to hunt him down the same way that Ses'qa is hunting down Yaqub. But this is where things get really interesting because this prophecy that Char is so obsessed with isn't really a prophecy in the traditional sense. According to Camille, Ses'qa apparently developed a sort of predictive modeling system which takes past data and extrapolates future results from them. And it calls those results a prophecy. So rather than saying these prophecies are a vision of an unchangeable destiny, it would be more accurate to describe them as statistically probable outcomes. That makes them a lot less inevitable. Now, I think, although I can't prove it, that Ses'qa developed this predictive model based on Ferament Lifebone, partly because of their long shared history with the Ferament, and partly because of what Lifebone's powers are and how they work. See, Ferament Lifebone has power over space-time. In fact, one of the things that made Lifebone's skeleton such a valuable military ship back on Terra was its ability to effectively teleport by manipulating space. But although its spatial warping ability was heavily utilized, its mastery over time wasn't. Which is pretty weird when you think about it, because the ability to travel through time is arguably the more powerful and interesting of the two, as you could theoretically use it to control the course of history. And that's a power the Sarkaz would have been desperate to get their hands on, given how the rest of Terra has ostracized, demonized, and repressed them throughout history, despite being the only species truly native to Terra. But there's a reason the Sarkaz never used Lifebone's time powers, and it has to do with how I think time works in the Arknights universe, at least where Lifebone is concerned. Apparently, Lifebone can drift freely throughout history but cannot interact with it directly, which renders its ability to travel into the past somewhat useless unless your goal is to witness a historical event firsthand to gather some critical information or something. And because the past remains unchangeable, Lifebone's time power is considered nothing more than a very fancy and elaborate illusion. So their time powers can't be used to change the past because the past is unchangeable. But if the past is unchangeable, does that mean the future is unchangeable as well? I'm not so sure about that. In spite of having time travel powers, Lifebone doesn't seem to be able to travel to or even see the future. And that suggests that Arknights doesn't actually function on a principle of predetermination or predestination, but instead argues a case for free will, which means the future doesn't actually exist. The future is nothing more than a series of infinite possibilities, which means the future can always be changed. Only the past and present are set in stone. But in spite of this, Lifebone is still called a prophet. But that's not because Lifebone has witnessed or can travel to the future, because the future is not determined yet. It's actually because Lifebone has witnessed all of history and can therefore identify repeating patterns within it. So Lifebone's prophecies are really nothing more than pattern recognition based on past data. And I think this is why Camille calls Ses'qa's prophecies the result of prediction models and doesn't treat them as absolute future outcomes. That's what I was getting at earlier when I talked about Ses'qa's prophecies being philosophically aligned with life bones. But I think Char doesn't see things this way. I do think Char likely knows how the predictive model works, but I also think he recognizes that a statistical probability is basically synonymous with an absolute outcome. But I also think he recognizes that a 99% chance is still not a guarantee. He's betting everything on that 1% chance that it might not come true. And in order to make that 1% chance his reality, he's been studying the mistakes of the past. Specifically, he's been looking into the last time this so-called prophecy came to pass. Because this prophecy has happened at least once already in Arknights history, and the game even tells us when via a readable in the Arno family home. And once you know the story it's referencing, you won't be able to unsee all the parallels and connections between it and Camille and Char's story. And the historical tale goes a bit like this. A long time ago, back on Terra, a young vampire named Danso was crowned king of the Sarkaz. And like all Sarkaz kings before him, he pursued a path of war. During this time, Fairnment Lifebone ventured a bit too near to Sarkaz territory, so Danso ordered his brother Duke-Arail to either drive it away or kill it. But Lifebone refused to leave, so Duke-Arail killed it. And that is how Lifebone's body fell into Sarkaz's hands and got converted into a military vessel by Camille and Char's parents. Now, after this incident, Danso's perspective on war started to change. And eventually, he decided it would be better for the Sarkaz to lay down their weapons and try to rebuild all they'd lost instead of waging constant war. This ignited a civil war amongst the Sarkaz between those who desired peace and those who wanted to pursue war. And Duke-Arail was part of the war camp. In the end, this difference of opinion led Duke-Arail to kill Danso. Now, there's obviously more to this story, but this is basically all you need to know in order to start drawing parallels between Danso and Duke-Arail's story and Camille and Char's story. So as the eldest twin, Camille ends up playing the role of Danso, while Char takes on the role of Duke-Arail. Interestingly, the visible portions of Char's portrait do resemble Duke-Arail as well, so it's very possible that Camille also looks like Danso, which, if true, means that we could call Camille's quest the Danso Macabre. Now, Danso also wanted to pursue peace, while Duke-Arail wanted to pursue war. And like Duke-Arail, Char is also choosing a path of violence and revenge, specifically against Ses'qa. Camille, on the other hand, is choosing loyalty to Ses'qa instead, making him a lot more like Danso. Now, I know this doesn't really sound like Camille's walking the path of peace like Danso was, but it is important to note that despite being a defensive warship, Ses'qa was actually founded on principles of peace, which is very rare for the Sarkaz. As I alluded to earlier, the Sarkaz have a very long tradition of violence and warfare. But Ses'qa's founders saw no need to continue their violent traditions and opted instead to turn Ses'qa into a Sarkazian symbol of peace. And that's partly why Ses'qa became known for its prolific and frequent carnivals and festivals. So by virtue of his loyalty to Ses'qa, Camille is in fact walking a path of peace, just like Danso. It's also worth noticing how both sets of vampire brothers have a strong connection to the Fairmont Lifebone. Danso and Duke-Arail through murder, and Camille and Char through their parents. But while we're on the topic of Lifebone, remember how I said Lifebone's time powers are treated as illusions? Well, Duke-Arail and Char are metaphorically stuck in the past, and Char even uses an illusion of the past to try and trap Camille. But this is where the similarities between Char and Duke-Arail end, because unlike Duke-Arail, who is true to his word and always does what he says he will, Char is a hypocrite. And that's actually to everyone's benefit, and also the main reason why I don't think Char actually wants to kill or be killed by Camille. Think about it. Char claims to hate Camille for breaking his music box, yet he used the music box to make Camille a key I'm going to talk more about in a minute. Char also taunted and lured Camille into an incredibly ornate illusion while threatening to kill him, only to leave long before he could reap Camille's blood. And when Camille found Char's surveillance room, Char acted as if he expected it, like that was exactly his plan from the start. He even planned to give Camille a means to track him down, which was planted right at the start of this little goose chase. It's almost like Char never intended to do anything to harm Camille. I mean, he didn't even kill any bystanders. Now, you can argue that Char is just toying with Camille and getting a kick out of it, but I don't think that's quite right. I think it's actually more likely that Char is intentionally leading Camille on so that he can control the precise distance between them at all times. Char's giving Camille just enough to keep the chase going, but never enough to get himself caught. And if there's one thing we know about Char, it's that he knows a lot about the prophecy that's attributed to him, and he hates both it and, by association, the place it came from, which is Ses'qa. So Char's primary goal could never be to kill or be killed by Camille. His goal is and always was to thwart the prophecy, which means not being killed or killing Camille. In fact, it's very possible that Char is only mad at Camille because if Char had died at the hands of the Landbreakers all those years ago, he would have already broken the prophecy. But don't misunderstand me, I'm not trying to reframe Char as a good guy or anything here. I just think it's important to understand exactly what his real goal is. Like I said, Char is someone very much stuck in the past, unable to see any solutions to the prophecy problem except the one that he's chosen. And I think that too mirrors the conflict between Danso and Duke-Rael. It's a conflict that stems from two opposing visions of the future. But I do wonder if the prophecy Ses'qa issued actually does contain a hint at how to prevent the disaster it predicted. Because this paragraph here basically says that the destruction will continue until the brothers reconcile. Not kill, reconcile. I know I'm paraphrasing here and it actually just says, till the hour when they meet again, the hour when light and dark mixes. But if the prophecy was actually saying like one had to kill the other and we're talking about one brother as light and the other as dark, then the prophecy would read something more like when light consumes the darkness or when the darkness consumes the light or something like that. Instead, they just say mix, which to me means balance or reconciliation. And I find this idea immensely funny, entirely because the white key Char gave to Camille. This key is incredibly symbolic. See, when Lifebone was first killed by Duke-Rael, its consciousness was actually fragmented, and those fragments were sealed into various artifacts, two of which are twin relics, two staves that are known as Black Lock and White Key, and when used together, the wielder can leverage Lifebone's full power over space-time. And I think the line, when light and dark mixes, kinda sounds like what would happen if you put a light key into a dark lock, don't you think? Keys and locks are made for each other in that they are two halves of a complete system. They're not unlike two twins who share powers. And the thing is, Char made that white key from one of the cylinders in his music box, which means the music box probably can't play music unless it has the key. So Char's music box is essentially the Black Lock, and it can only be opened or played by the key he gave his brother. And I think that too is an intentional choice on Char's part. My point is mostly that Char loves his brother very much and isn't actually trying to kill or be killed by him. Thank you for coming to my lore talk. And now that I'm done talking, I will once again remind you that both Camille's banner and his story quest are available now. So if for some reason you still haven't played it or picked up a copy of Camille, you should. And there's a link in the description to help you out. I want to give a huge thanks to my channel members for supporting my nonsense and putting up with all my ramblings, and I would like to extend another large thank you to you for watching. It's a bit of an abrupt end, but sometimes partings do be like that. So until next time, bye-bye.